President Biden in office for 18 months, and just administration puts the American people last. The left and the dishonest media, which in my humble opinion is the greatest threat to this country, the dishonest media, began questioning President Trump's mental state back in February of 2017, a month into his presidency. We now have President Biden in office for 18 months, and just recently, we now see the mainstream media questioning President Biden's mental state, and for good reason. Sadly, he shakes hands with ghosts and imaginary people. He falls off bicycles. Even at the White House Easter celebration, the Easter Bunny had to guide him back into his safe place. Cue cards that say, "sit here," or "end of speech," which he actually states, that is, if he stays awake. So my question for you is, sir, have you spoken with any other cabinet members about implementing the 25th Amendment on President Biden?
First of all, I'm glad to have a president who can ride a bicycle. And
That's the
I
question.
will look beyond the insulting nature of that question and make clear to you that the President of
Have
the United
you
States...
spoken to any other
course not.
cabinet members about implementing the 25th Amendment on President Biden?
Of course not.
Please allow the
You ought to
witness to
know
finish his answer.
Have you
that the
emailed,
President of
this
the
is my
United
time,
States-
have you emailed any members
President of
with
the
the
United
executive
States-
branch about the President's health or
President
cognitive
of the
decline,
United States
including
is
text
as
messages
vigorous a
from your
colleague
private
or
phone?
boss as I have
I
ever had the
figured this.
pleasure of working with.
What about political appointees at USDOT? Have you spoken about
Gentleman's
this issue
time
with
has
them?
expired.
I couldn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
Well,
You yield me
Matt-
1 minute, sir?
absolutely not. If you had yielded the secretary some time to actually answer the ridiculous question, you might have actually gotten something. We will now.
The trip to the border this last week was very educational, and I had visited the border several years ago in the Trump administration, and we saw the different policies that were being implemented at that time. What I saw on this trip to the border was infinitely worse. What we saw was the policy of catch and release, where we encountered a number of groups, and as Senator Barrasso had described, these two little girls who were afraid and alone. It was very appalling. Each one of them, it had cost their family $8,000 each to traffic them across the border. But we also heard stories from the Border Patrol agents about just a few days ahead of that, another 5- and 6-year-old that had been trafficked to the border. Only in that instance, those that had been smuggling those little girls had brutally sexually assaulted them, 5 and 6 years old, so badly that emergency medical response personnel had to be called. And this is not a rarity. About 30% of the women and girls that are being trafficked up to the border are sexually assaulted by the coyotes. And those are the ones that report. And Border Patrol estimates that it is twice that amount that are actually assaulted. So about 60% of those women and girls. This is appalling. And yet we have an administration that's really complicit by continuing to encourage people to be smuggled to our border with an open border policy. We really have to assist our Border Patrol agents protect the borders of our nation and make sure that we're not encouraging catch and release. It only encourages people to send their children up to the border to release them into the United States. And all along the way, those coyotes, those smugglers know and understand they can do whatever they want to those humans that are being pushed to the border with no repercussions. And they're just becoming wealthier and wealthier. The second issue there that is impacting Iowa directly is the issue of methamphetamine and fentanyl. I-35 ran right up through that sector of the border and comes straight up to Iowa. My communities are being impacted by methamphetamine. Every state is now a border state, and we're seeing the impacts of the border crisis in real time every day.
Yields back, Mr. Gates.
I've heard enough, Mr. Chairman. I believe that we can have bipartisan agreement on legislation out of this committee that might be our hallmark achievement of this Congress. But I want to echo the point Mr. Issa made. It is not just the government that engages in these really terrifying data marketplaces. It's the Chinese Communist Party, Russia, big corporations. Chairman Goodlatte, does the Walt Disney Corporation engage in this terrifying data marketplace?
I don't know the answer to that.
But sure, they're lobbyists, right?
I do work for them, but I don't know the answer to your question.
So wait a second, you used to chair this committee. You come here and you tell us about all the harm in this data enterprise, but you don't know that, I mean, you're the Republican that the Disney Corporation hired because they have problems with the Republicans, and you didn't ever talk to them about this?
I came here today to testify regarding the importance of this legislation, which, as you noted, is bipartisan, and
So the LA
relates to-
Times
it relates
says
to the
Disney
importance
is
of the
running the
government.
happiest surveillance operation on earth. Had you seen that article from the LA Times?
I've not seen it.
I think it might have been when you were chairman that it came out. And Disney's actually been sued. And they've been sued because Disney installs software on applications used by children, and then they not only buy data from data brokers, Disney then turns around and sells the data that they collect off of children. Are you familiar with that litigation?
I am not.
And there's a Forbes article that came out while you were chairman of this committee, and it talks about the robots that Disney sends around its park to collect data on the people at the park to utilize. Quote, Disney is even dabbling in making robotic versions of Mickey and Minnie and all of its characters that would move around with the guests and interact with them. So as you sit here and talk to us about the harm of this data enterprise, are you concerned that the people who pay you also engage in that very same work?
I think that it would be appropriate for the Congress to look at data collection practices beyond the scope of what this committee is looking at here today. But I also think it's very important to understand that what government can do with that data is very different than what individual enterprises can do. And so that's why I'm here to talk about the Fourth Amendment.
But sometimes, right, I saw in your testimony you say, well, only the government can tax you and only the government can regulate you. But what I'm worried about is that private entities can try to program you. They could try to get you to think a certain way, and they can use this data in a very harmful way. And like particularly with the Walt Disney Corporation that is in business with the Chinese Communist Party, that thanks the Chinese Communist Party for all of the accommodations they got in the filming of Mulan. Like, you know, does it concern you that the Walt Disney Corporation is selling the information of children?
I don't know that that's the fact.
Are you being purposefully ignorant to the fact that Walt Disney engages in the very activities that you're here testifying against?
Well, I do not know the facts that you've stated, so I can't comment.
Well, right, but are you purposefully not learning them so that you can simultaneously take money from Disney to try to make them look less evil to Republicans and then advocate on behalf of other organizations before the Congress that critique the very work that Disney's doing?
I'm here to advocate on behalf of people who are concerned about abuses of the Fourth Amendment.
Chairman Goodlatte, do you remember a conversation you and I had when you led this committee at the Capitol Hill Club where you said the best way to be successful in the Judiciary Committee is to find interest groups that are opposed to one another and to tell both of them that you'll support their positions so they'll both make donations to your campaigns?
I definitely do not.
You're under oath, Chairman.
Conversation. I do not.
No. Well, I hope that's not the case in lobbying as well, that you go and, you know, that as a legislator, you try to find interest groups to play off of one another. Then as a lobbyist, you go and take money from the Walt Disney Corporation that is quite literally buying and selling data in precisely the way that you find objectionable today. I think it's a reason why a lot of people are concerned about folks who go from being in Congress to being members of the lobby corps and then using the relationships and that they've developed in order to sell influence. And that selling influence can be just as damaging sometimes as the buying and selling of data. And the Walt Disney Corporation that, you know, that goes against so many of the values of their own patrons certainly isn't worthy of that. And, you know, since there's no federal, legislation on this issue, it doesn't seem like it's preempted. So maybe if we had a really smart governor like Governor DeSantis in Florida, they could actually have state-based laws that would attack these issues. Wouldn't that be quite a thing? Mr. Chairman, I now seek unanimous consent to enter a few articles in the record.
Listen.
I have Disney takes over Hulu, a company with serious data collection issues, from Combardo.com. I have from the LA Times, Disneyland is tracking guests and generating big profits doing it. I have from WDinfo.com, Disney facing lawsuit over collecting and selling children's personal information. And I have Disney uses big data, IT, and machine learning to boost the customer experience, and that is from Forbes.
Without objection, and the time of the gentleman has expired.